Young Australians seeking to grow their wealth face challenges as they begin with, well, lower super balances and investable funds, perhaps below that critical $1 million mark. Joining us now to discuss that, John Cachia from Thriving Wealth. John, welcome.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me.
Well, of course, we know how younger Australians are struggling at the moment with the cost of living pressures, trying to find a place to live. There's so much to consider. So when you go to a financial advisor and say, look, I want a plan, are some of them just turning them away simply because they don't have that cash in the bank as such?
Yeah, and a lot of advisors that we're talking to just don't know how to handle that. You know, they're so used to maybe the traditional way of financial advice, which is, funds under management and large balances and superannuation, that we really need to work with this cohort around their expectations, their goals, and what they're really trying to achieve. And when we talk about expectations, we need to really firm up what they really want. Do you want the family? Do you want the house? What do you want? Do you want the handbag? And then really starting to prioritize that and then work with them about building a realistic plan to help them through some of the most complex times in their life. And with cost of living rising as well, it's a delicate way of doing things.
Well, let's then see how you approach that with them. And I was going to ask the question, how early do you start? I'm assuming you're going to say start as early as you can once you're earning. What do you need to consider?
Yeah, so I saw a young person this week. He was 23 years of age, starting out, and he was starting before the whole marriage and kids and stuff like that. And the biggest thing that he had the problem on was everything he was making was going out. So the first thing to address was to ensure he has surplus cash flow. And a lot of people simply just don't know where their money goes. And it's only until we have the surplus cash flow that we can then allocate towards future investing. And I think that the thing is, especially in 2024 with TikTok and Instagram and all of these things, everyone wants to get rich overnight. So if you take your future money and put it into investments that aren't going to reap the rewards later on, it also could be detrimental when they need the funds for maybe like a house, future family, so reserves as well, so early as possible and setting the right foundations.
As we well know, having financial discipline at a young age can be difficult, particularly in times like this, where we're simply trying to make ends meet and the bills are going up. We've got so many outgoings. How then do you do that? How do you actually put money aside to invest and build a portfolio?
Well, for this individual, it was actually a really good case that we're discussing this, because it actually got to the point where he needs to look at his expenses, but he also needs to simply earn more. And he actually talked about, what do I do? And I said, mate, well, how much free time do you have? And when we talked about free time, and you got to start trading time at the start, he had to essentially get a second job. So he had his Saturdays and Sundays free. He had 3 hours each day that he said he could work, and it was simply to work harder to generate more cash flow. So I think it's an area that a lot of people don't consider, is around how I can elevate my income and focus on the expenses and focus on the investments to do the heavy lifting, which I just want to say out there, the younger cohort, there's nothing hard with a little bit of hard work,
Yeah, well, that's again, it comes down to that discipline, doesn't it? So what do you need to consider when obviously you start earning, you do earn super at the same time, but it's not, you don't really consider it as much, I guess, at that age, because you think, well, that's down the track. I'll focus on it when I'm older. How important is it to build super at the same time as having an investment portfolio?
Yeah, well, it's best to do both, because your 60-year-old, 65-year-old self will really thank you for it. So usually when we're setting up a lot of these plans for these younger people, we drip feed at the start into superannuation on top of their employer contributions. We want to be making sure that there's things usually that come out of their superannuation, like insurances and stuff like that. We don't want them to be eroding at that retirement balance, but we want to have the right amount for when they retire to give them that nice tax-effective income after retirement. So it's really balancing those long-term goals and then identifying, well, when do we need to pay off that house and when do they want to be financially free? Because you speak to a lot of people, they don't want to work to 60 if they don't have to. So how are you going to have access to funds if we don't start investing for those, maybe that 45 to 55 period?
So you've been talking about, I guess, setting someone up who's young before they get married, before they have kids. Of course, that can be a roadblock in terms of your investments are concerned, because that is another considerable cost when you're raising a family. So what's your approach?
Yeah, so we do long-term modelling and figure out if there's going to be any negative cash flow positions, if one person goes off work, if there's going to be part-time, and really trying to understand what's going to happen through that turbulent period. So we might need to slow down the investments over a period of time to make sure that they have a significant nest egg not nest egg, emergency fund to be able to kind of go through that period of time. So it's not as simple as just set and forget. For these people that are maybe even pregnant and are about to start planning, well, we need to get a hurry on making sure those foundations are correct, because what will happen is they'll start taking money from the areas they shouldn't be, which is their long-term investments during that period. So long-term modelling, setting foundations, and having the discipline and behaviours to get through.
And John, what sort of assets are you considering for investing in when you're setting up these portfolios?
So a lot of these younger people, when we're talking about it, we're going to be talking about stocks and property, okay? Because a lot of them are big long-term assets that they're going to hold for a long period of time. But if they don't have the right plan, well then they're not going to be able to hold on to those assets for a long time. And we saw that post-COVID, where a lot of people rushed into, say, property, rushed into stocks, cost of living then rises and they have to liquidate those funds. So we need to be making sure that their safety bucket, which is their emergency funds, are set up. So if we are buying these long-term assets like stocks, ETFs, so on and so forth, that they're not touching them. They've got to actually bear the fruits of what the seeds that they planted today.
And of course, debt can be scary for a young person. Do you encourage the use of leverage?
Yes and no. I think they've got to have the right behaviours and the right understanding about that. I think a lot of people see the upside of using leverage and don't understand the downside. And so we work with a lot of our clients to understand debt. Obviously, a lot of our clients have debt when they're buying a mortgage to live in. If you're in Melbourne or Sydney or wherever you're in to buy a house these days, you need some leverage. But when it comes to your investments, we need to see, do we need to add leverage to get to that position? Do we need a speed in the car to get to the destination on time? So we only use it if we need to.